Welcome back to football's golden oldies from the Toll House in Lancaster for part 2 of the remarkable Dixie Dean story. Before you start watching this, can you subscribe and hit the notification button? Back in the First Division for 1931-32, Dixie, who was 24, thought he was at the peak of his career. And this was the best Everton team he ever played in. Sager, Williams, Cresswell, Bright, Britton, G, Thompson, Critchley, Dunn, Dean, Johnson and Steen. He scored 45 in 38 games and Herbert Chapman was determined to stop him. So he told Herbie Roberts, the Arsenal centre-half, to go everywhere with Bill. They were both on the touchline, where Bill said to Herbie, "I'm off to the lavatory now, Herbie, are you coming with me?" Of course, all the fans heard what was said and it brought the place down. Bill and Herbie were also great friends who would play golf together when the opportunity arose. Everton would win the league with 56 points from Arsenal on 54 points. Everton thus became the only team to win the Second Division and the First Division in consecutive years. I believe that only 2 clubs have done it since then, but who were they? So that's maybe a question that you can ask in a quiz. Well, the answer to that is Spurs and Ipswich Town under Alf Ramsey. 1932-33, Dixie completed his collection. Everton were like a top-class orchestra. Everybody was in tune with everybody else. Everton had no problems reaching Wembley to meet Manchester City in the FA Cup final, who were 7-4 favourites. Numbered shirts would be worn for the first time, and luckily Everton were given 1-11. And Manchester City 11-22. So Dixie was the first man to ever wear number 9. Lucky and very appropriate. Sam Cowan, the City captain, stood near Dixie in the tunnel and his hands were shaking so much he could scarcely hold the ball. Jimmy Steen scored first, Dixie added the second and Jimmy Dunn scored the third to complete a 3-0 win. Dixie proudly walked up the steps to the Royal Box to receive the trophy from the Duchess of York, who said she had really enjoyed the game. After Wembley came the celebrations. Everton celebrated their FA Cup victory at a reception at a West End hotel, and Lord Derby was in the chair. Dixie went up to him and said, "I believe you have a good horse in the Chester Vase this year," to which Lord Derby replied, "My trainer tells me if Hyperion wins the Vase, he will win the Derby." All the Everton team and staff had a good bet on Hyperion, but on the day of the race they were on tour in Copenhagen, sitting in the beer garden of the Hotel Cosmopolitan. When the result came through on the radio, they all leapt to their feet in celebration, spilling beer all over a famous film star, Jean Hersholt, who refused Dixie's offer to have his suit cleaned and instead bought a round of drinks for everyone. Next day, they travelled back by train to Liverpool, and from Crewe to Liverpool, thousands of fans were stood in the fields lining the track. From Lime Street, they travelled to the town hall by horse-drawn wagonette, which you can see in the photograph, before going on to Goodison Park, which was packed to the rafters. Everton began to slide. After they won the FA Cup in 1933, Everton began to slide, and they had a few ordinary seasons. In 1934, Dixie was injured and played in only 12 games, scoring 9 goals. But 1935 saw him score 27 in 43 games. Once again, injuries struck in 1936 when he scored 17 in 29 games, following up with 27 goals in 40 games in 1937. In 1936, Everton had signed another great centre forward, Tommy Lawton, for £6,500 from Burnley. And Dixie knew he had been bought to replace him, but that didn't prevent him from meeting Tommy at Lime Street Station and welcoming him to the Goodison family. Tommy was only 17 years of age, and Dixie would stay behind after training to coach him. The last Goodison milestone. In 1936, Dixie had one final milestone to pass, and he did it in a game against Sheffield Wednesday. The great Steve Bloomer had scored 352 league goals for Derby County, so Dixie needed one more goal. And the photograph, Dixie can be seen shaking hands with the great Steve Bloomer at Lime Street Station. Steve was 62 at the time and would die in Derby 2 years later in 1938, having scored 28 goals in 23 games for England. Before every home game at Derby, fans still sing "Steve Bloom was watching" before the kick-off, and that's a nice touch. Jackie Coulter took a corner and Dixie headed the ball down rather than under the crossbar, as there were 5 defenders on the goal line. First man to congratulate him was his Birkenhead and Tranmere teammate Ellis Rimmer, who was playing for Wednesday. Dixie leaves Everton in 1937-38. Dixie played until September 1937, but was then dropped for punching club secretary Theo Kelly, an obnoxious man who would also get rid of Joe Mercer after the war. Some different versions of this depending on which book you read, but I like this one. He would have liked to have stayed at Everton, but the break came in 1938 when he was transferred to Notts County for £3,000. In the second game he broke a bone in his foot and was in Nottingham General Hospital for 2 months and was still hobbling when he was discharged, playing just 7 games for County in total. Sligo Rovers wrote to him, and Dixie eventually agreed to play for them when County let him go. He played 11 games for them, scoring 11 goals. Nothing unexpected about that, is there? Sligo finished runners-up in the Irish League and reached the Irish Cup final, losing 1-0 in a replay. They had never before reached such heights. In the celebrations, Dixie's medal was stolen, but 8 years later, a package with an Irish postmark arrived at the Dublin Packet pub with the medal inside. No note or signature, but whoever sent it must have had a pang of, I don't know what it was, but he thought, I must send this medal back to the man who deserves it. The last game he played for them was in December 1940, and the same night he was on the boat back to England to serve his country. After the war, he needed to find a job, so he asked an old friend at Chester Northgate Breweries about a pub. He offered him the Dublin Packet, which was in the main square of Chester. Retirement. Those 60 goals in 39 matches, plus 40 scored in internationals, cup ties and friendlies, brought his season total to an amazing 100 goals, a record tally that has stood for over 100 years, and to me it will stand for the next 200 years. Dixie scored almost 500 goals in his career before retiring to run the Dublin Packet pub in Chester. He's one of the few strikers never to have been cautioned in his career. The photo shows Dixie behind the bar with his medals and a few England caps on show, but not the 16 he deserved. When he played for England, he had the choice of a cap or £6, but not both. You can always rely on the Football Association to do the wrong thing. landlord and friend of the Stars. When he became landlord of the Dublin Packet in Chester, it became a great attraction with Dixie behind the bar. Stars of sport, stage and screen frequently called to pay their respects at all times of day or night. The immortal Lester Piggott, who was a hero of mine, who Dixie knew well, was riding at Chester races, and after an early morning training gallop, he called round to the pub about 6 o'clock in the morning. He knocked on the side door of the pub, and after a while the door was opened by Mrs. Dean. "I'm Lester Piggott." Mr. Dean said I could call round at any time. Ethel shouted upstairs to Dixie, "Bill, there's a Mr. Piggott here to see you. He says he's from Leicester." That is a line straight out of a Morecambe and Wise script. Everton did the right thing, which is a rarity in football. He gave up the licensing trade when he was 53 and had very little cash in the bank. So he went to see John Moores, an Everton director, asking for his help, and Moores, to his everlasting credit, did the right thing, which is very, very rare in football. Moores gave him a job at Littlewoods, and then, with Dick Searle, chairman of Everton, suggested a testimonial match. Dixie didn't want any players from outside Liverpool, so he suggested this to John Moores, who readily agreed. A bonanza, and Dixie was comfortable. It's a measure of his popularity that when the club gave him a testimonial match in 1964, 26 years after he stopped playing for them, a crowd of over 40,000 turned out. That's not surprising to me. Dixie selected an England team: Rankin, Byrne, Moran, Harris, LeBone, Kay, Callaghan, Stevens, Pickering, Temple, Morrissey. And the Scotland team was Lawrence, Brown, Thompson, Gabriel, Yates, Stevenson, Scott, St John, Young, Vernon, Wallace, all selected from the Liverpool and Everton squads. He got the gate receipts from the match, about £9,000 to £10,000, and John Moores kept it and invested it all, so Dixie got an income from it while it continued to build up. This was great thinking by John Moores, as Dixie would most likely have deposited the money in bookmakers' pockets. Not sure if you find chairmen like that anymore. The Scotland team, led out by Ron Yates, followed by the Flying Pig, Tommy Lawrence. England team led out by Tony Kay, a recent 6,000 buy from Sheffield Wednesday, who would soon be banned for life, with Peter Swan and David Bronco Lane for fixing a match against Ipswich Town in 1962. It was a tragedy, as the 1966 World Cup team would maybe have included him and Swan. Eight players, one iconic shirt. The Everton number 9. William Ralph Dixie Dean, 433 games, 383 goals. Tommy Lowe, 95 games, 70 goals. Dave Hickson, 243 games, 111 goals. Alex Young, 275 games, 89 goals. Joe Roy, 276 games, 119 goals. Bob Latchford, 289 games, 138 goals. Graham Sharp, 447 games, 159 goals. Duncan Ferguson, 273 games, 72 goals. The photo was taken in 1966, shows 3 Goodison greats from 1924 to 1968. Tommy Lawton, Alex Young and Dixie Dean, who scored a total of 534 goals in 797 appearances for the Toffees. There are no nicknames today. Today players' nicknames lack imagination. There is no Black Pearl, Nijinsky or Ghost of White Hart Lane. These players were Eusebio, Colin Bell and John White. In the 1960s, Alex Young of Everton was dubbed the Golden Vision, a near celestial nickname. It was Tottenham Hotspur's double-winning captain, Danny Blanchflower, that coined the phrase in tribute to Young. Blanchflower said, "The view every Saturday that we have of a more perfect world, a world that has got pattern and is finite, and that is Alex, the Golden Vision." The team, managed by Harry Catterick, was a product of the so-called School of Science, yet another nickname, a tag that was given to the club in the 1930s by the legendary Steve Bloomer, who described Everton's football as scientific in the days of William Ralph Dean. Still battling on, in 1976, his doctor diagnosed a thrombosis and immediately sent Dixie to hospital, where he underwent a major operation to save his life. But after a week, despite the efforts of his doctors, his leg couldn't be saved, and he went back to hospital again to have it amputated. It was the 17th operation that he had been through during his life of service to Everton Football Club. With his truly remarkable constitution, within 5 days he was able to get out of bed for short periods and, with some assistance, hobble about on crutches. As we heard before, Harry Cook kept all of Dixie's bones in a jam jar, but the one thing Harry could not bottle was Dean's indefatigable spirit and love for the toffees. They never found a way to measure those qualities. He was described by Geoffrey Green in the Times as the greatest centre-forward of all time. There was a poetry in him, and if only England had his like today. Who would disagree with that statement? When two great men meet, Bill Shankly, Billy Liddell and Dixie had enjoyed lunch together at Liverpool's Moat House Hotel on Paradise Street before the Derby match. Bill Shankly said, "Dixie Dean was the greatest centre-forward there will ever be. His record of scoring goals is the most amazing thing under the sun. He belongs in the company of the supremely great, like Beethoven, Shakespeare and Rembrandt." Dixie's great friend Bill Shankly delivered those words as a tribute. Just a few hours later, they became a moving obituary. The funeral. William Ralph Dean died on March 1st, 1980, aged 73, after suffering a heart attack at Everton's ground, Goodison Park, whilst watching a match against their closest rivals, Liverpool. It was the first time Dixie had visited Goodison Park for several years due to his ill health. The funeral took place at St James's Church on Laird Street, Birkenhead, where he had been born. After the funeral, Bill Shankly, the great Liverpool manager and football's king of the one-liners, remarked that Dixie Dean, dead, could draw a bigger crowd than today's Everton live. Mick Lyons left and Bob Latchford right carried Dixie's coffin. Dixie Dean facts. His wage was never more than £8 a week. A natural sportsman, Dixie was a good cricketer, a scratch golfer, and in the off-season pitched baseball with the Liverpool Caledonians. And that's the photograph there. On an Everton pre-war tour of Germany, he refused to return the Nazi salute, insisting the rest of the team did the same. Dixie was a man of principle and wouldn't bow to any authority if he thought they were wrong. He was the first player to ever wear the number 9 shirt when where number jerseys were introduced for the 1933 FA Cup final. A series of postage stamps commemorating the 2000 European Cup featured a typical Dean header saying Dixie Dean 1907 to 1980. Dixie's pre-match refreshment was a glass of sherry mixed with 2 raw eggs. The man responsible for the 60-goal record. For decades, Everton fans have been adulating Dixie Dean for breaking the record of 59 goals in a season, set by George Campbell in 1927, which were all scored in the second division. But there has been little mention of Harry Cook, the trainer, who was an Evertonian through and through, and his key contribution to Dixie's record should be talked about more often, if not shouted from the rooftops. Dixie said, "If it hadn't been for Harry Cook, I would not have played against Arsenal in the final game of the 1927-28 season. The position was this: with 2 games to go, I needed 7 goals to beat Campbell's record of 59. The first game was at Turf Moor against Burnley on Wednesday, where I scored 4 in the first half against England's centre-half Big Jack Hill, who was a pal of mine and classed as the best centre-half in the country. But I didn't do anything in the second half because I badly pulled the thigh muscle and was in considerable pain." Harry Cook's treatment. Harry was visibly shaking when he realised the severity of Dixie's injury, so when they got him back from Burnley, he went to Dixie's home in Alderley Avenue, Birkenhead. He wanted to put hot plasters on Dixie's leg, and you were supposed to leave them on for about 12 hours, but Harry was not content with that, so when Dixie went to bed, Harry sat in a chair in the bedroom and woke Dixie up every 2 hours to put a fresh plaster on, and he did this for 3 nights on the run, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday nights, before the Arsenal game. Dixie said, "Without Harry, I would never have played that day and never broken the record." In the morning, they would call at Harry's home before going to Goodison for more treatment. It was basically 24 hours continuous treatment. Dixie said, "I don't know how he stuck it for 3 days and nights without hardly any sleep. Harry was a wonderful man. All the lads at Everton would do anything for him, and he was a terrific man and a great, great friend to me." On May 5th, 1928, Dixie Dean scored his hat-trick against Arsenal, taking his total to 60, a record that has stood for almost 100 years, and it'll never be beaten. It will stand most likely for 500 years. More medals than any Everton player in their long and storied history. Harry won more medals than any player, but started only 9 games for the Toffees and appeared on more team photos than any Evertonian, but played only 1 season. Harry's collection included 2 FA Cup medals from 1906 and 1933, League winners' medals from 1928, 1932 and 1939, a second division medal from 1931, a medal from the Barcelona Cup in 1924, Central League winners' medal from 1914, numerous Liverpool Senior Cup winners' medals, and 7 commemorative medals for representing England on international duty. He served Everton for almost 60 years as trainer, mentor, coach and scout, but when Harry Catterick arrived in April 1961, it signalled the end, and in June he was awarded a pension of £5 a week by the board of directors. It was truly the end of an era. A story from Brian LeBourne, who joined Everton in 1957. Harry must have been about 75 then, and he had this dirty old cloth from Dixie's time, and whatever was wrong with your leg, Harry would put oil and other mysterious stuff on the cloth, which was never washed, and rub your leg down. About 3 days later, your leg would break out in a hell of a rash. Harry was a truly remarkable man, and a servant to the club he loved. Dixie's statistics plus a photo of 4 iconic players. Born January 27th, 1907 in Birkenhead. Married Ethel Fossard, 1931. Children, 3 sons and a daughter. Died March 1st, 1980 at Goodison Park. 60 league goals for Everton in the 1927-28 season. 349 goals for Everton, including 37 hat-tricks. Average, well, it's near enough a goal a game. 18 goals in 16 games for England. There were headlines in the paper after Harry Kane scored 50 goals in 71 appearances for England. My opinion of Kane is that a good player, but nothing more than that, when you compare him to William Ralph Dean. If Dixie had played 71 games for England, how many goals would he have scored? Well, 80 or 90 at least. And the photograph you can see there is Joe Mercer, Ted Drake and Stan Mortensen looking after Dixie after he'd had his leg amputated. A final word. Matt Busby played against Dixie and said, to play against Dixie was both a delight and a nightmare. He was a perfect specimen of an athlete, beautifully proportioned, with immense strength, adept on the ground, but with extraordinary skill in the air. He could hit the ball with his head as hard as most players could kick it, and he was resilient in the face of the big, tough centre-halves of the day. I cannot think of one centre-half today to match up with that lot, and Dixie was a thorough sportsman. Eddie Hapgood, the Arsenal fullback, said, Dixie Dean, a wizard with his feet, deadly with his head, as strong as a horse and hard to knock off the ball, as clean in his play as a new pin, and a great sportsman. Dixie was leaving the pitch after a game in 1938 when a spectator called out, "We'll get you yet, you black bastard." Dean went over to him and flattened him with one punch. A policeman came running over, but instead of arresting him, he shook his hand. During his 60-goal season, Dixie remembered, when Herbert Chapman took over at Arsenal, he came up to Everton and put a blank cheque on the table for me. And Everton said, nothing doing, so Herbert went back to London. Yeah, a blank cheque. Remember Dixie every day. We'll never see his like again.